Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. I apologize that our guest, Radi Francis, is not going to be with us today. I promise you that she will be with us today. However, she is ill and she offered me to come to the show, but I told her she has to rest. I think her health is more important than coming to a show because she has to come to the show. So I gave her time to rest and recover, and I rescheduled the interview with the Lebanese correspondent, war correspondent, and journalist Radi Francis to Saturday, 5 p.m. Central European Time again. In the past video, guys, we spoke mostly about Al Jazeera's bureau chief, Wael Dahdoh. He's being personally targeted by Israeli occupation forces. His family is being liquidated. Most of his family members are liquidated. And because I spoke about his case, YouTube suppressed that content. Mostly and usually in the past 3 months, every live streaming that I do, the number of the views are between 3,000 to 10,000 views. And only this video hasn't reached the 2,000 views, although lots of people were hitting the likes and everything. And also YouTube demonetized the video, so they don't want us to speak about these cases. And it doesn't stop here. If you haven't heard about this case, guys, speaking the truth is costly, and people need to know that when you speak about the truth, lots of things could happen to you, and one of which is being deplatformed. And this time on X, or formerly known Twitter, where Elon Musk claimed that he is a freedom of speech absolutist, and despite that, today we woke up in the morning seeing that four famous accounts on X: Alan MacLeod, Zay Squirrel, Robrus Robuso, and True Unemployed. Four of them are pro Palestinian accounts, and four of them have big reach, and four of them were suspended today. I know worse things could happen, and people are getting killed in the Gaza Strip for reporting about what's happening there. But also, there are people who are messengers, people who are amplifying the voices of the Palestinian people and their suffering on social media platforms. And apparently, these accounts are being punished nowadays, and their accounts are suspended, like completely suspended. And they say for violating the X rules. And all of them, they posted this account is two, so five accounts. This is from Zay Squirrel. He says, Elon Musk's Twitter just banned me without giving any reason. I didn't get any post that was flagged. No infraction, no warning, nothing. Just suspended. So I suspect it is because I have been exposing the propaganda of the genocidal Israeli regime and its supporters, including recently Bill Ackman, who is absolutely deranged in his favor to ban any criticism of him. I would appreciate if I would appreciate it if you could post to say I should be unbanned and tag the support account and Elon Musk if you can on X. And similarly, Alan MacLeod, he said, today, without warning or explanation, Twitter suspended my account. They told me to check my email for a reason, but no email has been forthcoming. I have never even remotely been involved in any controversy, been reported, been stuck in Twitter jail before. So I assume the real reason is political, especially as high profile leftist accounts like Rob Russo and Zay Squirrel were also targeted today. Probably the only chance I have to get the account back is if enough people object to this kick up a sting. Thanks for reading this. So if you guys are on X and if you would like to help these suspended accounts, now you know their names. You can come back after the live streaming and try to create more fuzz, or simply retweet what Caitlin Johnson said in this regard. And this is very, to be honest with you, it's unbelievable. Suspending these accounts without giving them any warnings to begin with. Somebody has to do something, right? At the beginning, to when you violate the rules and regulations of any platform, they should send you a warning, and it's not happening. So if you guys want to amplify their voices and try to help them to get back their accounts, I think it's good way to start by retweeting the post of Caitlin Johnson on X, or formerly known Twitter. However, other people, they're losing their lives. Over 100 Palestinian journalists, they perished during this war. I don't know if I have to call it a war. Anyways, it's an onslaught against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, one of which is, of course, targeted his family. We mentioned this previously in the previous live streaming, and he is Wael Dahdour. And today, Christian Amanpour, or yesterday night after the live streaming, because it was a morning in the United States, she says the number of journalists killed during Israel's war on Hamas is appalling and unprecedented. 79 in just 3 months, according to press freedom. And the numbers are higher, guys. It's over 100 journalists killed in the Gaza Strip. And this is no more than Israel's war on Hamas. Please be aware of the wordings, how they frame it, how they write the wordings, right? It's all calculated. You have to be careful. Of course, part of it, they're fighting against Hamas, but this is not only a war against Hamas, this is also a war against the Palestinians. And the Israeli politicians, they are saying that their goal is to expel the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. This is not my words or my analysis. So this is what she says in this regard. Now that Twitter it's giving me difficulties, I hope that my account is not going to be suspended.
And the war on Hamas continues to reach grim heights. Speaking during his latest trip to the region, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today said he is deeply, deeply sorry for the almost unimaginable loss suffered by Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, Wael al-Dadu. His son, Hamza, was killed on Sunday, along with freelancer Mustafa Thuraya. The Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, confirmed that they were killed in an airstrike, saying they were targeting a terrorist. Wael's two other children, his wife and his grandchild, were all killed 3 months ago in an Israeli airstrike. And here is what he had to say as he laid his son to rest.
The world must see with their eyes and not with Israel's eyes. It must listen and watch all that is happening to the Palestinian people. What has Hamza done to them? And what has my family done to them? What have civilians in the Gaza Strip done to them? They have not done anything. The world is blinded by what is going on in Gaza.
The world is blinded by what's happening in Gaza, guys. This is what he said in this regard. And I totally agree with him. And look, for example, Christian Amanpour, this is from the CNN. Nowhere in her tweet even she mentions that all these journalists were killed by the Israeli forces. Nowhere. They don't even dare to mention the perpetrator. How can I even consider someone a journalist when this journalist cannot even mention the perpetrator of a crime? And she doesn't even say it's a crime. And it goes even worse than that, guys. Israel has a full-time cyber army on X. Okay? They pay them huge sum of money, not like independent journalists like myself. They pay them money to do propaganda for Israel. And they pay these people money so that they justify anything that Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip. And I don't want to go into names. One day I will show you these names and these accounts clearly that these people are paid by Israel to do the propaganda for them, right? And these people today are saying that these journalists who were killed, including the son of Wael Dahdoh, were either embedded by Hamas or they say they participated or they were accompanying Hamas. There are two things here, embedded with Hamas and accompanying Hamas. They are not the same thing, okay? And I myself, as a journalist, I want to know what the law says in this regard, right? If I'm a journalist, I'm working with the Hamas. Am I considered a civilian because I'm a journalist, or am I considered a combatant? This is the question, right? So when there is a war and when an army is advancing somewhere or bombing somewhere, if they see a journalist with the badge, with the helmet, with the car sign written press, and there is Hamas, for example, which is a combatant, right? And under international law, Israeli army can kill Hamas militants. But is it permissible to also kill the journalist? Good question, right? So I digged in and look what we found about this case. The law is very clear, guys. It doesn't need so much interpretation. Therefore, I'm going to show you this. This is from the ICRC website, okay? From the ICRC website. This is the law under the Geneva Convention, the protection of journalists and media professionals in time of armed conflict. So I wanted to see what is it. So the protection of war correspondents. These people who died are war correspondents, right? They were covering a war. So what does the law say about them? The law is clear here. It says war correspondents fall into the ill-defined category of, quote, persons who accompany the armed forces without actually being members thereof. Since they are not part of the armed forces, they enjoy civilian status and the protection derived from that status. Moreover, since they are, in a manner of speaking, associated with the war effort, they are entitled to prisoner of war status when they fall into the hands of the enemy, provided they have been duly authorized to accompany the armed forces. So, for an argument's sake, guys, okay, for an argument's sake, if these journalists were accompanying Hamas, because this is what Israel says. We don't know if it's true or not. Probably they were not even accompanying Hamas and they were just passing by and they hit them and they said, oh, we were just hitting terrorists. But even if these journalists were accompanying Hamas, they are still considered civilians and they have a protected status under international law. Therefore, Israel has no right under international law to kill these journalists. This is according to the law, right? So, to continue, I will show you more. When do they lose their protection, right? When someone is a journalist and participating in coverage of an events in, let's say, the Gaza Strip, when does this journalist lose its protection under international law? So under Article 72.79.2 and 51.3 of Protocol 1, journalists enjoy the protection afforded by international humanitarian law, provided that they do not take a direct part in the hostilities. According to the commentary of Article 51.3, quote, direct participation in the hostilities means, quote, acts of war which by their nature or purpose are likely to cause actual harm to the personnel and equipment of the enemy armed forces. The fact that a journalist engages, according to the law, guys, if a journalist is participating in the acts of hostilities, which means I'm a journalist, I'm wearing a vest, and I'm accompanying Hamas, and during this time, I am firing a rocket, I'm firing a bullet, I'm participating in any military act that could harm the enemy's personnel or their equipment. That's the only time Israel, in this case, has the right to kill these journalists. Have they done that? No. And even Israel doesn't claim that these journalists have done that. Israel only says they were embedded with Hamas, which still we don't have the proof for that. But I'm giving you the explanation for an argument's sake, right? Because we are here to counter this propaganda and to tell the truth under law, under international law. So, the fact that a journalist engages in propaganda cannot be considered as direct participation. It is only when a journalist takes a direct part in the hostilities that he loses his immunity and becomes a legitimate target. Once he ceases to do so, he recovers his right to protection against the effects of the hostilities. So even if these journalists were embedded with Hamas, they're not legitimate targets. And even if these journalists were doing propaganda for Hamas, they're not legitimate targets. The only time Israel can kill them if these journalists participated in the acts of hostilities. They carried arms, they shot a bullet, they fired a missile or a rocket, or did anything that could harm the enemy personnel, which is the Israeli forces in this case, or their equipment. Therefore, what Israel has done with these 100 journalists is a war crime. Period. Now, I'm following female journalists in Gaza Strip. I just wanted to bring your attention to this because if you remember on Talk TV, this woman journalist who was bashing and patronizing and saying some racist thing about Barghouti, the Palestinian politician in West Bank and said, maybe you are not used woman speaking. She's a wonderful woman from the Gaza Strip, and I've been following her since October 7. Her name is Hind Khudari, and she is reporting from underground in the Gaza Strip. And she says, we will continue reporting. The only thing that will stop us is killing us. Those are harsh words from her, but this is the psychology of the people now there, right? They want to bring their voices, but at the same time, they also know that no amount of reporting, to be honest with you, nowadays can stop what's happening there. The only thing that can stop what's happening there now is either the ICJ now issues a strong decision about what's happening in the Gaza Strip, or the United States stops it. Will the United States stop it? I doubt, to be honest with you. They are trying. Like, look, I'm being very objective with you. The United States doesn't want a regional war. Iran doesn't want a regional war. Syria doesn't want a regional war. Saudi Arabia doesn't want a regional war. Hezbollah doesn't want a regional war. And they all agree that they don't want a regional war. And they all agree at the same time that Israel wants a regional war. Of course, the regional players are saying it openly, and the American officials are saying it tacitly. And the Biden administration knows and thinks that if because Netanyahu is under huge pressure because he's not achieving his goals in the Gaza Strip, so they're afraid that he would go on an adventure in Lebanon this time, right? This is from the Politico. It's published, I think, today. The US is dealing with an Israeli leader who is losing control, and this is the title of our live streaming today, guys. So the US is dealing with Benjamin Netanyahu, who is losing control, but losing control over what? So let's dive together and see what's happening in Israel. US officials have to work with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as they try to contain the Israel Hamas war. But some are starting to wonder if he is really in charge. This is an interesting thing to say because they think that Netanyahu is probably being influenced by other people in his cabinet and he's not fully in charge. The far right figures, notably ministers Smotrich and Ben Gvir, harbor deep anti Palestinian views and are resistant to US proposals that they consider too friendly to the Palestinians. If they abandon Netanyahu's coalition, he could lose his prime ministership, increasing his legal peril. That has made Netanyahu reluctant to take American advice on the war. So Netanyahu himself is in a trouble with his ministers, and especially these two far-right, racist, fascist ministers, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are openly calling for ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And if these two personnel, these two figures, withdraw from the coalition with Netanyahu, then he will probably no more be a prime minister. And what could happen next if he is no more a prime minister? You know, there are legal cases against Netanyahu, right? So he's very worried about that. So he's not really taking the advice of the Americans because he's afraid to lose his prime ministership. In his desire to stay in power, he made so many compromises with Israel's most extreme factions that he had tied himself down even before the war. Now, trying to please the Smotriches and Ben Gavirs on his right is weakening his ability to make hard decisions during a moment of unusual peril for Israel. This is what I explained. Aaron David Miller, a former longtime Middle East negotiator, describes Netanyahu as increasingly desperate. He says, quote, "It is a terrible example of a leader who has conflated his own political survival with what he considers to be the best interests of this country. It's a horrible combination and it leads to terrible decision making." So there are there is the consideration of his personal political survival in the case. Therefore, if he follows or accepts the advices of the United States and these ministers withdraw from the cabinet and he loses the prime ministership, then his political career is over. Therefore, he tied his political career and future of his political career with the fate of the country. So I think he's like acting more like a dictator right now. Netanyahu's saving grace may be that the conflict has led to a new sense of unity among Israelis who were previously bitterly divided over the judicial overhaul he tried to push through largely at the urging of his more right leaning allies. Asked for comment on Netanyahu's standing in Israel and current ties to the Biden administration, Adrian Watson, a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, said, quote, "We will not comment on the domestic politics of other nations, but noted that Biden and Netanyahu have a long-standing relationship." I mean, this is a joke, right? He's not going to comment about the internal affairs of other country. Like United States sticks its nose every other country that they dislike the policies of these countries. They stick their nose in Syria, in Cuba, in Iran, in Russia, in China, like in everywhere around the world, even in their allies, right? And they tell them what to do and what type of policy they should pursue domestically and on the foreign policy level. But when it comes to Israel, we don't want to comment about the domestic affairs in Israel, right? Anyways. US officials also believe that the political pressure from the far right is one reason Netanyahu drags his feet on US requests to permit more humanitarian aid to reach Gaza, where many Palestinians are starving. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have gone further, reportedly calling for the supposedly voluntary migration of the Palestinians of Gaza and future Israeli settlement and occupation of the territory. The State Department has blasted such comments as inflammatory and irresponsible. This is what I told you. They were calling for ethnic cleansing, and they call it voluntary migration. Like the language is so ironic, man. Like they're bombing the hell out of them and they're calling it voluntary migration. Some American officials argue that the longer the war takes, the easier it will be for Netanyahu to delay a serious inquiry into why Israel failed to prevent the Hamas attack on October 7. Successfully defeating Hamas could also reduce Israeli popular anger toward him. So there is some sort of dissatisfaction toward Netanyahu since October 7. People are asking the question, we elected you because you promised us security, and the October 7 attacks happened. It's a major breakthrough into the Israeli security system, whether they let it happen or not. But if now Netanyahu prolongs the war, this could also delay the judicial inquiries and the investigation, right, against him. And also, if he succeeds in eliminating Hamas from the Gaza Strip, this could also reduce Israeli popular anger toward him. I'm not sure if he is able to eliminate Hamas, to be honest with you. My friends, we are almost 300 people watching this live streaming. I would really appreciate it if you could please hit the like button of this video, because it helps me in navigating through the algorithm of YouTube. And this video will be suggested now to more people to join this live streaming. And also, when this live streaming is over, this video will appear on the timeline of so many people who are subscribed and they cannot see these videos because of the suppression on YouTube. I would really appreciate it. Last time we tried it and it worked brilliantly. So in order to try to check the pulse, though the pulse in the region, Antony Blinken was in the Middle East and he met with MBS. This is coming from Bahar Dak Kumar. He is an Indian journalist. He's an Indian former diplomat, and he wrote about this case and why Antony Blinken flew and traveled to the Middle East and what is he trying to do in the region. And I think why I'm showing you these articles now, there are a few articles that I'm going to show you today, and if we combine them together, we come to the conclusion that Netanyahu is in trouble and he's trying to export his internal trouble to the region, and he's trying to open a big front with Lebanon. He says, first and foremost, the Israeli operation in Gaza so far has been a failure. It turned the world opinion especially in the global south, heavily against Israel. South Africa's petition to the International Criminal Court over war crimes in Gaza being the most telling evidence of it. Not International Criminal Court, it's the International Court of Justice, but it's a mistake, but I have to mention it. So, the South Africa's petition to the International Court of Justice over war crimes in Gaza being the most telling evidence of it, while Israeli military came a cropper in terms of its agenda to decimate Hamas. Tel Aviv has reached none of its stated goals in the Gaza Strip, in the Gaza war, which are annihilation of Hamas or disarming of Hamas and release of captives held by the Palestinians in Gaza. That brings the security and military establishment in Tel Aviv, whose reputation has been seriously dented following the October 7 attacks, under immense pressure. On the other hand, there have been a cover up of the heavy casualties suffered by Israeli troops in the Gaza operation. The Kerman terrorist attack and the killing of Saleh al Arouri actually betray a high level of frustration. So, what were the goals of the Netanyahu government in the Gaza Strip? Is the annihilation of Hamas, or the disarmament of Hamas, and the release of the Israeli captives held by Hamas, and none of these were met, right? So they are under immense pressure, and the reputation of the Israeli security is in jeopardy. And now we have the Kerman terrorist attack in Iran and the assassination of Saleh al Arouri, which is a senior Hamas official in Beirut. This shows, according to the Indian diplomat, a big frustration from the Israeli side. And in his words, then he's accusing Israel of committing that terrorist attack, right, in Kerman, in Iran, which killed over 100 civilians. In political terms, there is a convergence between the security and military establishment and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose political future hangs by a thread, and the ultra-rightist fascist forces aligned with him, whose interests lie in an extended war. See, this is a point of convergence, for example, between the previous article and this article by the Indian diplomat. The only external force capable of pressuring Israel is, of course, the US administration. But it's too much to expect President Biden to draw the red line to Israel, that is, even assuming that he has the political will to do so, given the Israeli lobby's control of the Congress and its seamless capacity for making or destroying the careers of US politicians. So, those are some big words, by the way, by the Indian diplomat. And he's telling you, like, even if the Biden administration, Biden himself, wants to push for a ceasefire, then the power of the Israeli lobby over the Congress will hold this call, and they will block any call for a ceasefire, because the lobby, Israeli lobby, the APAC, they are able, according to this Indian former diplomat, to destroy the careers of US politicians if they dare to do anything that they see it harming the interests of Israel. So sometimes you ask yourself the question, who is in charge of who in the United States? Biden's interest narrows down to prevent the war from spreading in the region, lest direct American military intervention becomes necessary. The US rhetoric and diplomatic posturing largely aims at damage control in Washington's relations with its erstwhile allies in the region. Quintessentially, Blinken's mission comes down cheap window dressing, through bringing the regional states to the same page that Israel is facing an existential crisis, but it doesn't take into account that the region has changed radically. What truly distinguishes the present crisis is that the Arab world is profoundly concerned and feels outraged by the barbaric Israeli behavior toward helpless, hapless Palestinians, quote, animals, as Israeli politicians have described them. The Arab psyche is convinced that an enduring final settlement of the Palestinian problem cannot be postponed indefinitely. Something has fundamentally changed even for Saudi Arabia, which had clandestine dealings with Israel for decades and was inching toward establishing formal relations with it. A Saudi statement said that while receiving Blinken in Al Ula on Monday, Al Ula, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, quote, stressed the importance of stopping military operations, intensifying humanitarian action, and working to create conditions for restoring stability and for a peace process that ensures that the Palestinian people gain their legitimate rights and achieve a just and lasting peace. The Saudi statement is at sharp variance with the read out by the US State Department. So even the Saudis, who are trying to normalize relations with Israel, and they were dealing with the Israelis under the table in the past 2-3 decades in any ways, and they are very good allies with the Americans. Even the Saudis, they they oppose this Israeli onslaught against the helpless Palestinians, and they are saying, look, the only solution now is a ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities, a peace process, and two-state solution. We cannot postpone solving this conflict for a few more decades because the Israeli intention is quite clear. They don't want two-state solution. They want one-state solution, and the Palestinians should be taken away from the Gaza Strip to the world to let's go and be refugees, just like the millions of other refugees that they created in 1948. This is what they say. I'm not like trying to put so much analysis in it, right? I'm really I know many people say that the Arabic countries betrayed Palestine, and I know that the Arabic countries can do so much more in this regard. And some other countries think, if from their perspective, that they're doing lots of diplomatic work to try to persuade the Americans to accept, to pressure the Israelis now to restart the peace process, right? However, this is just my opinion now. I truly believe that Israel's reputation and image has been tarnished beyond repair. And lots of people around the world, they are starting to question everything that Israel is doing. Like, we haven't seen so much questioning about Israel's behavior policies in the past decades. After October 7, and after what the politicians in Israel are saying about the Palestinians and how they're acting and how they are uh, killing the Palestinians en masse, right? And according to the estimates, 250 Palestinians are dying every day in the Gaza Strip, 7,500 per month. If Israel continues this onslaught till the end of December 2024, over 100,000 people will perish. And therefore, they're creating a situation that, first, the Gaza Strip is unlivable, so they're destroying the infrastructure. And two, they are killing as much as people possible in order to create the psychological condition and environment that these people, and if you were living there, you would say, I cannot survive this place anymore. I want to get out, right? And once you get out, it's done. There is no way to come back to the Gaza Strip. I apologize. I just need to drink water. So, one thing, however, to take into account, guys, that one thing that the American administration is not really telling the world is that there is an escalation, right, against American forces in the region. In Iraq, American forces are coming under fire. In Syria, American forces are coming under fire. Houthis are blocking the cargo ships of the Israelis, and they're threatening Americans. So everything in the region is now volatile. But what the American administration is not really telling its own people is that this escalation is happening there after October 7 can de-escalate if the Americans impose a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip instead of escalating. Like, the American administration is telling their people, we have to escalate in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran, in Palestine, and we have to hit what they call Iran-backed militias here and there in order to force them to de-escalate and create a deterrence against them. Whereas the fact is exactly the opposite. If the United States forces Israel to stop the hostilities in the Gaza Strip, all these attacks will also stop, and there will be de-escalation. And this is something was explained brilliantly by Trita Parsi on Democracy Now. Take a look.
Territory. One of the things that I think is highly problematic in the way that the mainstream media has covered this is that it talks about how Biden is grappling with how to avoid an escalation of this war. And I genuinely believe that the Biden administration doesn't want that. But these reports don't seem to mention that the demand of some of these groups is a ceasefire. And if there is a ceasefire, they would also then de-escalate their attacks on US troops, etc. Now, the reporting doesn't have to say that this is what is going to happen. It should be scrutinizing these statements by the Houthis and Iraqi militias. But at a minimum, it needs to mention that that is their demand so that the American public is aware that it appears to exist an option for de-escalation through a ceasefire. The fact that it is not mentioned in most mainstream media is highly problematic because it leaves the public with the wrong impression that the only way Biden can de-escalate is by further escalating the situation, by increasing the deterrence and attacking whether it's the Houthis or the Iraqi militias. The option of actually going for a ceasefire to de-escalate doesn't seem to be mentioned in the mainstream media, and that's a major mistake, I think.
Yeah, it's a major mistake, actually. Then nobody's telling this, right, in the media, that what if we impose a ceasefire in the Gaza? Why did all this, what they call Iran-linked or Iran-backed groups, started shooting against American targets in the region? Why have they all of a sudden emboldened themselves to fight against American interests in the region, whether in the Red Sea or in Iraq or in Syria, right? What if the Americans impose a ceasefire there? What would happen? This is an important question, right? They're not really trying to tell you the truth about this case. So that's why we bring you all this information so that you guys also know that behind closed doors, if anyone is genuinely interested in the escalation in the region, this is the path forward. Ceasefire, revival of the peace talks, state for the Palestinians, drawing the border lines. What's so difficult about that? Because one side is actually even they're talking about going to to Lebanon now against Hezbollah, and this is coming from the Israeli Haaretz. This is analysis. Israel Hezbollah war would be devastating for both sides. So why does it feel inevitable? He says, and he is a Israeli author, Alan Pinkas, and he was a consul of Israel in a few countries, so he was a diplomat. The current discourse on the likelihood, inevitability, and scope of an Israeli Hezbollah conflagration is somewhat misleading, he says. While Washington is wary of such a development, assuming it may drag the United States into a Mideast war when its interests lie elsewhere, Israel seems resigned to the idea. So much so that a Washington Post article quoted US officials expressing, quote, alarm and estimating that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is encouraging escalation as a key to his political survival and further distancing himself from the responsibility for the October 7th debacle. Do you see, guys, these three articles that I showed you today? And three of them are all analysis. And the three of them, they just go to the same direction, that Netanyahu is interested in escalation and is trying to save himself and his political career by expanding the scope of the war. None of these analysts, who are literally not pro-Iran, they're all pro-Israel or pro-United States, right? They all say the same thing about this case, that Iran is not interested in escalation and Hezbollah is not interested in escalation. It's Israel under Netanyahu interested in escalation. Immediately after the Hamas attack on October 7, the United States identified preventing escalation with Hezbollah in Lebanon and with Iran throughout the region as a prime interest. As this is important, guys, I made it with three colors because he explains brilliantly how the United States, because the United States' primary goal is to de-escalate or avoid the expansion of the war with Hezbollah and Iran. And how did the United States did that? They, in yellow, it says, as early as October 11, the Biden administration pushed back forcefully against Israeli ideas of a preemptive strike on Hezbollah. So Israel was proposing preemptive strikes against Hezbollah on October 11, and the Americans were forcefully pushing against that. They said, no, that's not going to happen. And the second phase, which is in green, by early December, the sense in Washington was that the skirmishes across the Israel-Lebanon border were contained and that further escalation was a low probability. So They saw how Hezbollah is retaliating and how are they shooting, the limited shooting from the Hezbollah side. So they were more or less a little bit uh, like they changed their mind that this war would not be expanded to Lebanon. So they were a little bit of like, yeah, they said it's a low probability now. However, later, a month later, so we're speaking about in December and probably also January, the assessment is being critically revisited, and escalation, the word of the month of October, is making a dangerous comeback. So now we are in January. This word is again being used in the discussions in the American administration. An Israeli Hezbollah war could be devastating for both sides. I want you guys to hear, just see what the author says. And I want you to remember what I was saying since October 7 about Hezbollah. All these things mentioned here, I said it previously, and now it's in the mainstream media. An Israeli Hezbollah war could be devastating for both sides. Despite Israel's vastly superior military, Hezbollah's precise missile arsenal presents an equalizer of sorts. The group is believed to have approximately 150,000 missiles and rockets, with up to 20,000 of them being GPS guided precision missiles with a range of 250 to 300 kilometers, capable of carrying around half a ton of high explosive warheads. Unlike Gaza, which is an encircled enclave, Lebanon has long borders with Syria, which in turn has long borders with Iraq and Turkey, ensuring the passage of arms and fighters. But perhaps the more important political dimension lie in the event of a ground war rather than an aerial missile exchange. If Israel invades Lebanon in order to drive Hezbollah away from the border, it would be invading a sovereign UN member state. So, according to this analysis, guys, what we have here, we have a strong military force in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has over 100,000 soldiers. Some of them, the elite Radwan forces, are trained on border crossing ground offensive tactics. So they could invade the Israeli territories and capture territories and fixate their troops there. And like we're speaking about troops that can be on offensive, not on defensive, right? They have over 150,000 missiles, and 20,000 of them are GPS guided precision missiles. So they can neutralize the Haifa port, they can neutralize the Tel Aviv airport, the Haifa airport, and all the strategic facilities in Israel. And he says if Israel invades Lebanon, then this will also be considered a violation of international law, which goes they are invading a sovereign country. This is where escalation should be viewed from a wider perspective. The February 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine extricated Iran. This is an explanation. This is a really good explanation here, actually. This is where escalation should be viewed from a wider perspective, he says. The February 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine extricated Iran from its relative isolation. First had come the reckless decision in May 2018 by then President Donald Trump, encouraged by Netanyahu, to unilaterally withdraw from the nuclear deal. Iran had then accelerated its nuclear program and is now a nuclear threshold state, weeks away from weapons grade enriched uranium and a year away from producing weapons. So, the Trump withdrew from this nuclear deal with Iran with the encouragement of Netanyahu, because Netanyahu always wants Iran to be a threat to Israel. He wants to salt himself as a security guarantor. And when there is no nuclear threat against them by Iran, and there is more diplomatic relations between the United States and Iran, this is something that Netanyahu cannot tolerate, to be honest. He wants Iran to stay in on an enemy line against the United States instead of being in a more soft approach between each other. Then came the invasion of Ukraine, and Russia and Iran needed each other. China's zero sum game view of international relations in respect to the Americans placed Beijing partially on Iran's side. Thanks to the progress it made on its nuclear program and its effective employment of Hezbollah and the Houthi movement, which threatens commercial shipping in the Red Sea, Iran is now emboldened. At the same time, it doesn't seem to actively court escalation but wants to maintain Hezbollah as a deterrent. Paradoxically, This is also how the United States sees it, which explains US concerns about Israeli escalation that will draw it into a war. This, Washington believes, can be avoided with diplomacy. The war in Gaza has become an ongoing military operation lacking political objectives, missing a strategic grand design, and devoid of an alignment between the military means and the diplomatic goals. So, if you want to summarize this, i- i- Hezbollah is capable of facing and deterring the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And if it happens, the United States will join the war forcibly. They don't want it. Iran doesn't want it. Iran created a deterrence against Israel. They have allies in the region, for example, Hezbollah in the southern Lebanon, the Houthis. So Iran believes in more these slow achievements here and there and scoring points rather than an open wide war against Israel or the United States, which is any logical country does, unless there is a historical leader in Iran, which I don't think so. They would resort into war. I want to show you finally something that is a little bit funny. This is a video I watched today. This is a guy, his name is Jonathan Al Khouri. He has Israeli flags on his profile, and he says that he's Lebanese. And he has something to say about what's happening in his country, Lebanon. Let's see.
Israel is not bombing my country. I have lost my country to a terrorist organization that is controlling its areas. See the pink areas over here in the north, in the south, and also in the south of Beirut. Hezbollah terrorist organization is controlling 100% of that area. There is no Lebanese sovereignty. There is no Lebanese police. There is no Lebanese military that can enter there and, operate and make sure that everything runs properly. No, Hezbollah is controlling it. So I'm sorry, but when Israel is bombing Hezbollah controlled areas, they're not bombing my country because my country doesn't exist anymore in these locations. So when Israel is bombing or responding to Hezbollah aggression since October 8th, they are making sure that the citizens here in Israel are safe from a terrorist organization that will not hesitate or didn't even hesitate to harm Lebanese citizens also in its process.
Guys, I just want to tell a few things here. First of all, did you realize that his accent is Hebrew? Like he literally said Hezbollah, he said Hezbollah. This is number one. Second, he's showing a map. He says these pink areas are controlled by Hezbollah and the Lebanese army isn't allowed to get in. This is a blatant lie. You know that, right? The Lebanese army is deployed in all these areas. In the eastern of Lebanon, in Beqa, in Valley, in the south. At the same time, Hezbollah are deployed there, right? And there is a coordination between the Lebanese army and the Hezbollah army. This is a blatant lie, whether you agree with him or not. Secondly, I truly do not understand how can someone put an Israeli flag in his account and say that he's a Lebanese, and then you go to his Twitter account and you see that there is no, like, this guy, he has three Israeli flags on his account, and then he has a Lebanese account and LGBTQ plus flags. And then on the header of his photo, he's sitting with Herzog, the Israeli president. And this guy says he's a Lebanese. And I wanted really to know, who are these people? Like, why is he speaking like this, right? I really wanted to know. So I digged in a little bit, and I found this. There is this post on Facebook that he says, he's carrying a banner, and he says, "I'm a Lebanese Christian living in Israel. Let's talk." And in Arabic, he says, Jonathan Al Khouri. He's a Lebanese young man. He escaped with his family to Israel, and he says he escaped to Israel, and he says, "Quote: In Lebanon, I was afraid to show my cross, and persecution like could reach to killing because only we are Christians. Uh, but in Israel, he says, I can show my like cross, and I can express my religious identity, and I would not be prosecuted against or abused by anyone. Guys, Lebanon has a big Christian community, and no one in Lebanon is prosecuted for being a Christian, just like no one in Syria is prosecuted for being Christian. Christians they can freely practice their religion. This is utter bullshit. But why was he expelled to Israel? Because he says he was forced to leave to Israel, right? And because I did a little bit of research, and look what I found about this guy, Jonathan Al-Khouri. He is the son of a former Israeli agent in Lebanon. So just to give you a quick context to you guys, when the Lebanese civil war started, Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. And when they invaded Lebanon in 1982, they hired collaborators in southern Lebanon. And some of these collaborators were from the Christian communities and Shia communities and Sunni communities, just representative of all the societies. And they formed an army of collaborators with the Israeli army to fight against the Palestinian factions, to fight against any sort of resistance, whether from the Syrians, whether from the Hezbollah, Amal, who were fighting against the Israeli forces, right? His father was one of the collaborators with the Israeli occupation forces in Lebanon. And this is coming from a Lebanese website. And they say, because the Khouri family is Arab and perhaps Lebanese, I searched for the identity of this person through the social media network, and it turned out that he is a Lebanese from east of Sidon, and his father was an agent in the Lahad army. The Hebrew website Jerusalem Post identified him with the following quote. This is from Jerusalem Post. Jonathan Khouri is a gay Lebanese Christian refugee living in Israel who has become an advocate and social leader in Israeli society. He and his family were forced to leave Lebanon for Israel for their protection after the Lebanese civil war because his father was a member of the South Lebanese army with support from Israel Defense Forces. So when Israel invaded Lebanon in 82 and they formed an army of collaborators, they called it the South Lebanon Army. However, do you know what was also the name of this army? You know that in Syria there is something called the Free Syrian Army, right? That the Americans, those are the Syrian collaborators, and the United States and Israel, they give them the weapons, the cash, the money, the intelligence support, the all sorts of lethal and non-lethal support, right? So, who is the South Lebanon Army? The South Lebanon Army, as I told you, it's an army of collaborators with Israel. So they say the South Lebanon Army or Lahad Army was a Christian-dominated militia. I would just make a highlight here. Was a Christian-dominated militia in Lebanon. It was founded by Lebanese military officer Saad Haddad in 1977 amidst the Lebanese civil war, and evolved to operate as a quasi-military during the South Lebanon conflict, basing itself in Haddad's unrecognized state of Free Lebanon. Initially, it was known as the Free Lebanon Army, just like the Free Syrian Army. They were called Free Lebanon Army after it broke away from the Army of Free Lebanon, another Christian-dominated militia. So these people were look like their allies. They they had Israel on their side. This is their ally, and their opponents were Hezbollah, Syria, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So this guy, his father was a collaborator with Israel, and he's of course forced to leave Lebanon because he's afraid of his life, and his father as well, because they collaborated with the occupants of their country, and now he's giving lectures. And just see the IQ of these people. And I ask myself this question: why does Israel hire not the smartest in the Arabic world? Why do they always hire the not so smartest people? I came to the conclusion that because they want a populistic, easy rhetoric that can touch the brains of the naive people, the simple people. They don't want to come and explain geopolitics, put maps, and try to bring articles and spend time like I do 6 hours per day to present a 1 hour of live streaming. No, they just bring someone who is, in Arabic we say أهبل على نياته يعني, and they just give him a platform and just spew anything you want against the enemy of Israel online, simplify things, and make people believe, because your targeted audience is not educated people or people who want to get educated. And I'm not speaking about degrees, by the way. Educated people are different from people with degrees. People who want to get enlightened and learn about politics, for example, they're not going to go to this Jonas and Khoury and learn about the politics in Lebanon, right? But if they are simple people in Lebanon and uneducated people about politics, and they would see this video, they would think, oh my God, Hezbollah is occupying my country and Lebanese army cannot move inside the country. Where is the sovereignty of Lebanon? Yeah, why there is Hezbollah? Because when Israel invaded Lebanon in 82, there was resistance against them, and this was the formation of Hezbollah, right? Hezbollah is a result, a consequence of an invasion, right? And so if an occupation of Lebanon is over, then Hezbollah will no more have a reason to stay. And two, why all this talk nowadays about Hezbollah and their presence? Because there is always a threat to invade Lebanon. And who is going to defend Lebanon from the Lebanese perspective? The Lebanese army is not even allowed to have an air force. They don't even have the right to have fighter jets, fighter helicopters, nothing. Like their tanks is from the 60s, from the 50s. And if they want to purchase, Iran told them that I want to sell you weapons. If you want, take it from me. And the government in Lebanon, because they are divided between pro-American and pro-Iran and pro-Syria, and the pro-American side were like, no, we don't want to buy weapons from Iran. We want to buy weapons from America and from France. And France and America, they give them junk from the 50s, from World War II, right? It's not, and even when they give them this junk, they tell them you're not allowed to use this weapon against Israel. That's why there is Hezbollah. If you give Lebanese army strength, weapons, ammunition, so that they can at least just defend their borders, there would be no need for Hezbollah. And Hezbollah will vanish, because Hezbollah is not it's the result of the absence of a military force to stop the Israeli forces from advancing inside Lebanon. And now, since 2006, this is the last time Israel dared to attack Lebanon. I think the United States knows the developments that happened in the region, and they studied the strength of Hezbollah. That's why they don't want Hezbollah to intervene in this conflict, and that's why they blocked the preemptive strikes of Israel on Hezbollah targets. That's why they don't want a regional war, because if a regional war happens, if Hezbollah intervenes, then the United States has to intervene, because Israel by itself, they cannot defeat Hezbollah. This is not my wishful thinking. This is just my analysis. I may be correct, I may be wrong, only time will tell. But until then, I hope it never happens. I hope all of you stay safe. If you're in Lebanon, if you're in Syria, if you're in Palestine, if you're in anywhere around the world, I hope you guys stay safe. I hope you never leave a war. And I hope these psychopathic people would leave power as soon as possible, because the reason for such live streamings, I'm like ranting now, I feel like my voice is gone, because I'm passionate about it. I don't want other people to live such wars, right? This is why I do it. This is why I try to enlighten people. So I really thank you guys for watching this live streaming. Hundreds of people watched it, probably 1,000 people watched this live streaming while it was live. I really appreciate it. Before you leave this live streaming, I kindly ask you to hit the like button. It helps me a lot with the algorithm of YouTube. And if you want to support me, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling now on the screen, www.patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. It's only $2, but it's a big help to me to continue as an independent journalist, to bring you content like this and do also interviews. And soon, this month, inshallah, I will host Whitney Webb. I just wrote all the questions and all the segments of this interview. I'm very excited about it. It needed to be done. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Salam.